An interesting ride. I am trying to wrestle the DR650 through these axle deep whoops, and I'm barely keeping the bush pig under control. If we do this sort of riding regularly, it might be time for a complete suspension upgrade. So let's talk about suspension. You sold your children for tests in scientific experiments so you could afford your brand new adventure bike.
Whoa!
Now you need to spend at least another $1,000 on fine-tuning that suspension.
Oh, bloody whoop!
But do you really need to get your suspension revalved and tuned? For some of us, sure, but many of us, probably not. Our local suspension tuners sometimes refuse to do suspension tuning. A guy will come in with a brand new bike and insist on having his suspension revalved. And our suspension guys say no. We know this motorbike already has great suspension that will suit your weight. You are wasting your money. And in some cases, the guy just goes to another suspension tuner that will take his money and he wastes it there instead. Now, if you have bucket loads of money, why not? But many of us are on a budget. And if our local suspension shop is honest and tells us we really don't need to waste money on a good suspension setup, it might pay to take notice. There are also other options to investigate first. Have you adjusted the suspension sag, preload and damping settings yet? Have you looked at budget mods first? If you just need a bit more damping, try a heavier fork coil.
Geez, who's picking these trails?
Some bikes, like the KLR 650, DR650 and V-Strom, still use old-fashioned rod forks, and a couple of $100 for Plex valves, Intimidators or DDC cartridges can transform the forks. Admittedly, some bikes come with terrible suspension, but if you aren't too heavy and just ride sedately on easy, smooth dirt roads, then those soft springs and bouncy damping might be okay. Also, keep in mind your riding skills will usually be far more important. If your suspension works reasonably well, you may find an investment in rider coaching will dramatically improve your safety and abilities. As we like to say, it's usually 80% the rider, only 20% the bike. Usually the biggest improvements come from developing your technique, with small potential improvements from your bike setup, tyre choice and suspension. For example, do you sit on the seat in rough terrain? Become comfortable standing on the foot pegs and you automatically gain a lot more suspension through your legs. And you can use your body weight more to control the bike. If you sit on the seat in rough conditions, you are just a dead lump of meat slowing the bike down. Learn to work with your bike and move around. Adventure and dual sport riding don't have to be expensive sports.
Bloody hell.
Other ways to save money?
Whoa!
If your existing suspension is okay, defer suspension tuning until you get the forks and shock serviced.
Oh, what are you jammed on?
It will be much cheaper as they are pulling the components apart anyway. Also, remove the suspension yourself and install it again. You can potentially save a few $100s in labour. Of course, there are times you should get that suspension tuned the moment you buy the bike. If you are overweight, it could be quite dangerous if the springs and damping don't match your weight.
White Power Suspension. You can't see we aren't trying.
Aggressive rider? Same again. I don't usually push the DR650 hard, but trying to ride fast on enduro tracks had me on the verge of soiling my pants frequently. Do you regularly carry a passenger or lots of luggage? Your rear shock may need a stiffer spring and firmer damping to cope. So, what was my situation? I kept the brand new DR650 completely stock for 4 months just to see if I really needed any modifications. I fitted Plex valves to the front forks, which made a huge difference for comparatively little money. And I will get a stiffer spring and rear valve for the rear shock, but I am deferring this until the suspension is due for a service to save money. But sure, if I had loads of money, I would get all this work done before my first ride. And just a final note, you might hear stories about Joe Bloggs had his suspension tuned on his $30,000 Wonder bike, and now he's so much faster, the bike is so much smoother and more in control. Is this true? Maybe, but just remember there's something called investment bias in psychology. When you've spent so much money on something, you can actively fool yourself into thinking you've made a very wise investment when possibly it made little difference at all. Maintain a healthy skepticism of everything you read and hear, including this video. So, what's been your experience with suspension? Do you throw the cash around or just live with mediocre suspension? Keen to hear your stories.